4:05 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:05 p.m. Pacific Time. Exact midday, the middle between sunrise and sunset in Berkeley, California, a city that inevitably would have taken down any monuments probably long before recently to Confederate soldiers if it actually had any, but California, of course, was on the Union side during the War of Northern Aggression, or the War for Federal Hegemony, or the War for, well, whatever, the so-called Civil War. But let's talk about the topic, simply because Kennedy McGovern wrote something up. I haven't used his stuff for a while, and I like what he writes, and hey, I think it's worth a midday report, especially a short one. But I called the topic, the precedent that New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu's removal of long-standing monuments to Confederate heroes, that's in New Orleans, could well be setting. And it's just something short that Kennedy wrote. And then I have some other stuff up there, including a bill that Alabama just passed and an Onion article from 20 years ago, what I consider the golden era of the Onion. It really was great in the late 90s. It's still pretty good. Maybe a little bit of a liberal bias, but they still have managed to keep it very clever, unlike, say, Saturday Night Live, which is not anywhere near its golden years. Yeah, so just I thought, being Jewish, like most American Jews, our ancestors, there were Jews in this country before the Civil War. The fact of the matter is most of them have intermarried. We're talking Sephardic and some German Jews, Sephardic being like from Spain, or I guess in a lot of cases Netherlands, the ones who came over in the 1700s. But really their ancestors, their descendants intermarried, and their descendants aren't really Jewish. I'm not trying to make this about Jews like I do a lot of the time, but that's the reality. Most Jews are descended from people who only first came to this country at early as 1880, 1890, and that's true in my case. So no one was here on the Union side, no one was here on the Confederate side, but I follow this because it's important to our country, and to respect our country's history, and to respect the fact that after the Civil War, the nation was supposed to come together, and treating the Confederacy and what was important to them appropriately, as Lincoln suggested, to malice toward none, that there was a healing process, and we respected, it wasn't me, it wasn't my ancestors, but that the Confederate history was to be respected, was part of what brought this country together, as far as I see. And I think it's a good thing to test so-called conservatives about. What do they think of this issue? Don't let them just say, I'm going to bring jobs here. I think a lot of conservatives, and Republicans certainly, need to be tested where they stand on some issues that might not make them look so good if they say what they really think. Force them to take a position. It's just a thought that I have. Anyone who's a Republican running for office should be asked these kinds of things, even among friends, even if it might lead to a soundbite later, because a lot of Republicans like to portray themselves as nice Republicans, not one of those bad Republicans. And I think it's important for people to be genuine and to find out who, if they're really with the people in a lot of cases, or really just trying to get a position and be part of the Washington swamp. And I think this is a good test for that kind of thing. Let me read you now what Kennedy McGovern wrote. Short and sweet. And by the way, if you want to accuse him of racism, his wife's black. And by definition, his children are too. You know how that works. Okay. Imagine a future 100 years from now where our progeny read about the Vietnam War in books, mostly written by people of the future and jaded by the lens of their time. Will there really even be books 100 years from now? I don't know. Enough of them decide they don't like the Vietnam War because collectivist thought decided to translate the history only from period writings done by hippies, which of course may happen in a lot more recently, a lot closer in the future than within 100 years. Could happen in our lifetimes, in fact. Enough of them decide they don't like the Vietnam War because collectivist thought decided to translate the history only from period writings done by hippies. The only side of the argument is no longer translated into modern books because, well, it's not what the people of the future like to read, so the other side of the argument is completely lost. In 2127, we have reached 152 years. That's 152 years is the amount of time since the end of the Civil War right now. We've reached 152 years since the end of the war in Vietnam, and anyone who knows what really happened has been dead for over a century. The order is given, and the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. is torn down. Frightening, right? Dystopian, right? Orwellian, right? It's a good thing that will never happen. Oh, wait. And then he concludes with, except in present-day New Orleans. And, of course, I have to add that Robert E. Lee was very much against slavery. George Washington, who has a nice monument in Washington, D.C., had slaves. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. He may have done more than just own slaves, depending on what history you read. Robert E. Lee, monument just came down, very much against slavery. And let's keep in mind, whether is it even really the Confederate flag or the Virginia battle flag? How many years was slavery there under that flag? You know what we know are talking about, the stars and bars. How many years was slavery legal under the American flag? I'm just saying, Colin Kaepernick, maybe you're watching, though it wouldn't explain in his case why. And by the way, I think this is why he's even more likely not getting hired by any NFL teams. This and the vegan diet, which isn't going to help a football career. I think what's really hurting Colin Kaepernick and causing him to be blacklisted is the fact that he wore the socks, which showed police officers as pigs. That's probably harder to come back from than the sitting during the national flag, during the national anthem, which of course was silent. But I'm on a tangent there. I want to share something that Davis Knight, when I posted this originally, I posted what Kennedy wrote when it wasn't a video. He made these two comments. He's from Louisiana, and I think these are two important points. Meanwhile, these people love their LSU Tigers. Tigers named for the special type of Confederate battalion from the area. Oops. By the way, I've been to Baton Rouge, and I did see Mike the Tiger. They have a tiger in a big cage, a little home right in the middle of campus. I don't know if they still do that. It didn't smell too good, by the way. I think I went on a Sunday. They hadn't cleaned it for a few days, but they do have a big tiger. Obviously, the mascot is a tiger, real tiger, but I just learned this. That's why LSU is called the Tigers. Another good point by Davis Knight of Louisiana. Those fleur-de-lis on the Saints uniforms, yeah, those used to brand runaway slaves. Tisk, tisk, can't have that. I didn't know that either. That's interesting. I always thought it was just related to the French heritage of the city, but maybe it was the French, the slaveholders of French origin who did that more, and that was a lot of the people there. Let me just continue with the report. Alabama passes bill to protect Confederate monuments even at the cost of economy. And there's a link from a website I haven't heard of, but let me just read it to you. The link is up there. Imagine a future... Oh, no, that's the same thing I read before. Some southern cities are rethinking the appropriateness of keeping such emblems on public property. Not Alabama. Alabama lawmakers on Friday approved a bill that prohibits the removal of Confederate monuments and other long-standing historical markers. The bill, passed in both the House and Senate, prohibits, quote, the relocation, removal, alteration, renaming, or other disturbance of any architecturally significant building, memorial street, or monument that have stood for more than 40 years on public property. It's very important that we address this issue to protect the history that made us who we are today as a state and as a country. The bill's Republican sponsor, Senator Gerald Allen, said, the role that our state played in the formation of the history of this nation is very important. Opponents to the bill said it is disrespectful to African Americans because it would preserve Confederate monuments and memorials related to slavery, in which many people believe champion the racism of the past. You say we are protecting history. We are not protecting history. We are protecting monuments that represent oppression to a large part of the people in the state of Alabama. Senator Hank Sanders, an African-American Democrat from Selma, said, well, what represents oppression is a very slippery slope, and you could just, what's to prevent it from being the Washington Monument later in the future? Just asking. And you can follow that argument even further. The Confederacy was made up of states that attempted to preserve slavery in the South, blah, 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 and secede from the United States in the Civil War of 1861 to 1865. Of course, there's a pretty strong argument out there that the Civil War was not exclusively, or not necessarily even mostly about slavery, but that's another discussion. You can look up online. There's a lot of great stuff on that. What's the guy's name? Professor at Loyola in Maryland wrote The Real Lincoln. You can Google The Real Lincoln. Professor from Loyola in Maryland, that's in Baltimore. Thomas DeStefano? That sounds right. Over the past several years, memorials to the Confederacy have fallen out of favor in some southern places. In 2015, Alabama's then Governor Robert Bentley ordered the removal of the Confederate flag from the state capitol after the shootings in a South Carolina church killed 9 African Americans. By the way, that was so ridiculous, blaming that on the Confederate flag. Allen had offered a similar legislation since then, criticizing the politically correct movement. Officials in New Orleans recently have been removing several Confederate monuments, including one of Jefferson Davis, president of the pro-slavery Confederacy, and P.G.T. Beauregard, a Confederate general, and I think Robert E. Lee. I'm blanking on what the fourth one was, though. The legislation states changes to names or memorials installed between 20 and 40 years ago would need permission from a new state committee. It would also apply to schools named to memorialize people. Such schools can't be renamed without approval from the committee, but can relocate or make renovations. The legislation will be sent to the desk of Governor Kay Ivey to be signed into law. Local entities that violated the law, as determined by the Attorney General, would be subject to a $25,000 fine, according to the bill. Several House Democrats said it could stifle ongoing construction on historical places throughout the state. In 10 days, if Ivey signs the bill, any construction going on would have to stop. Representative Dexter Grimsley said, "History is haunted in less than 10 days in Alabama." Okay, well, I mean, maybe the writing of it isn't perfect. That can be a problem, by the way, on bills we agree with. You got to get the text right, but I don't know. I don't think that's the main point here. So there you go. Gave you information you're probably not going to get from Katie Tour or Holly Jackson or Tom Lamas on the big networks. I think this is an important story. But I really think you should read that Onion article, especially if you've absorbed this. It's a great contrast and it's quite funny.